In this video we're going to get confident sketching outside. I'm going to show you loads of sketches and talk you through some important challenges and the solutions which will get you happy sketching outside. We're going to look at ideas like finding what to sketch. How do we actually nail in that viewpoint and that composition? We're going to look at getting comfy, getting our equipment out and being flexible with our supplies, but also not feeling pressured to use anything in particular. We'll look at adapting our normal sketching practices and also experimenting above and beyond that. And we're going to cover some of those really important ideas outside, like how to measure and find angles. So when we're sketching outside, what are we actually sketching? Stupid question, I know, but I suppose the answer is we're sketching our view, aren't we? We're sketching what's in front of us. We're sketching that beautiful thing that we saw. But that is in itself a challenge. So firstly, the beautiful thing we see might not have a place to sit. And we'll talk about finding a seat in a moment. But it is worth thinking about, if we have this amazing view, but we have to stand in the middle of a road, we probably aren't going to realistically be able to sketch it outside, or at least not without making some changes. Now, this might sound obvious, but the first thing I'd recommend doing is taking a walk. Take a walk around wherever you are. Often we are drawn to really beautiful things, and that's great. And that is, of course, probably what we want to sketch. But even by just walking around, you might encounter other beautiful things. You might find places you can sit. And it's really important to think outside the box here. So where you find a seat, that's fantastic. But otherwise, you might find a comfy wall, which is okay to sit on. You might find a place that you can set up a tripod. Or sometimes just sitting on the grass is both the best viewpoint and also the most comfy place to be. A little solution that I love is my seat that I'm sat on at the moment. It's super lightweight and really cheap. You can find loads of different versions on Amazon and in other sort of budget outdoor stores. And it fits in a bag, a simple bag. Mine, along with some sketching stuff, is in this little bag today. And that means I can sit anywhere, not as comfortably as at home, but I can still sit anywhere. The next thing to recognize is it's very hard to get that perfect view, like you can take a perfect photo. So for example, I was walking around Buxton the other day, had a lovely chance to be there for the weekend, and they have this amazing opera house, and you see it, and it's pretty intricate, pretty fantastic, and pretty interesting to sketch. But when we look at it, as we walk up to it, it's sort of this either tiny object in our distant vision, or it absolutely fills our vision. If we take a photo, we can suddenly zoom in, and when we zoom in, we find our frame. So when we're out and about, we need to be aware that that's kind of what we're looking to do. We're not looking to sketch the entire of our vision. We're looking to go, oh, this bit of our vision, that is our photo or our sketch. And that's what we do naturally with the camera. That's what the camera forces us to do. But we need to be conscious about that when we're sketching. Again, we'll talk about that in a moment, how we can achieve that. But to start with, we just need to recognize the idea that we're not sketching our entire vision. And also, we might need to make some changes. If we go back to our opera house, it's a little bit higgledy-piggledy at the moment, isn't it? It's got a load of scaffolding on it. But what if we just remove the scaffolding? Does that detract from our sketch? Probably not. No, it's no longer the real reality sat in front of us. But it's probably a nicer reality, isn't it? So we need to recognize again that actually we're able to change our world. I often talk about changing the reference. In this case, the world is our reference, and it's absolutely okay, if not necessary, to change the world when we sketch. We could take other views from Buxton to illustrate the same idea, walking around looking for a place to view the Buxton baths, famous sort of, I think they're Roman era baths, but interesting to sketch nonetheless. What we find is first the view's too big, so we need to zoom it in, and then when I find a nice viewpoint and a nice place to sit on a little concrete cube in the high street, well, there's a lighthouse and a sort of a man, a very interesting man selling lots of stuff, but a man I don't want in my scene sort of stood in the way. So I need to adapt and remove that. Now, another interesting challenge about our view and the idea of needing to change things is that our view can change. Now, I've got a beautiful way of illustrating this with a sketch I did in Bath, actually. And we can see this interesting viewpoint again. This time, actually, the whole view is the interesting bit, sketching that broad vista of the sort of silhouette of the various buildings and the big tower. But as I'm happily getting into my sketch, look who pulls up. And so we have this giant bin lorry in the way. And I sort of just think, we've got options here. Either I stop and wait, and I did for a little while, but then it was still there several minutes later. So you know what, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to go from memory. I'm going to go from what I can see. I'm going to keep it loose and interesting. And in this way, I'm adapting the world, adapting my scene. Funnily enough, the lorry did disappear, and I thought, great, I can keep going properly now. And I'm being more visual about what I'm doing, more about the actual scene. And then obviously it reverses back and brings another one along with it. And that just goes to show the world is unpredictable. By the time these two lorries had got out of the way, the light had totally changed. So even if I'd been perfect in my representation of the world itself has now decided to change. The other thing about finding our seat is arranging our stuff around us. And with that comes thinking about what equipment do we have. Now again, today, as I said, I've just got a small bag, and we can sketch outdoors using a sketchbook. This is an A5 sketchbook, and a pen. So I've got actually two pens with me today. One is a few day pen, and the other is a little grayscale marker. And with that, I'll be able to create both line and some 3D tone. The other thing I've got, which I absolutely love, is my little watercolor palette. So this, you can see, has a space for a water brush, a space for a little sponge, and I've just got 7 colors. These are some handmade colors. They are really beautiful. It's a very minimalist setup. And what I would suggest when you're first setting out is to pack minimally. Think what's the minimum stuff that you need to have your experience sketching outside, and bring that. You will be able to create amazing art with very, very little. That said, there is always room to bring more. And if you want to bring more, you can. For example, one of my favorite setups to bring at the moment is my Etcher satchel bag. And in that, I don't pack a huge amount, but it's very flexible. So I can pop a couple of pens in there, a couple of different brushes. I can bring different sketchbooks, which lets me do some of the techniques that we'll be looking at later in this video. It can go on a tripod. It can also sit on my lap, or it can be put to one side, and I will just use it as a storage facility. It's quite an expensive bag, and there are loads of other options, like the IKEA Mala is a favourite one. That costs about £10, and you can sew on a little strap, and you've got essentially the same thing as the expensive Etcher bag. When we're thinking about how we're being clever and all this with our expensive bag, which is also a drawing board, you can also do things like sit in a cafe. Be respectful, buy a drink, don't overstay your welcome and stay there for hours without supporting that little business. But a cafe is a really wonderful place to sketch, with loads of sketching opportunities, often inside and outside views. Now, when we are sketching outside, it's really important to recognise that things are going to be different. We're outside and things are unpredictable. The more subtle things are that we have wind, we have sort of changes in the temperature, and this will impact subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, things like the drying speed of our inks and our watercolours. Be prepared to adapt. Be prepared that those happy accidents might be what you need to rely on for your art to become perfect, rather than being perfect in your processes, because your processes might have to change to adapt to the local environment. Having said that, it is important to, if we want a reliable, or as reliable an outcome as possible, to stick to the kind of things that we do know. For example, when I'm out and about, what I will tend to do is strip things back a little bit, but stick to my normal processes. For example, here I'm sketching a shopfront cafe. What I'm doing is I'm stripping it back by making it a no-point perspective sketch. But then I'm bringing out my normal fountain pen, creating a one-line sketch, splashing on some colours. I'm changing the colours a little bit, but I'm just using my normal processes, and as such I get a reliable result. Within being as reliable and as normal and within our normal processes as possible, it's also an opportunity to experiment in a risk-free way. Things are going to be a bit more difficult, so one experiment you could have is to strip things back and make it simpler. That's a really brilliant way of sketching, using a minimalist palette, using a different pen, bolder lines perhaps, as a simple thing to do. Another thing you could do is sketch stuff you don't normally sketch. Maybe a little fun sketch of some plants. That's sketching outside, it's urban sketching. Or sketching some people in a cafe. Again, if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. It's fine, you are outside and don't worry too much about it. The other thing you can experiment with is using different brushes. Water brushes are fantastic as a way of changing our processes. They're not as good in pretty much every way. If you're in the studio, they are not as good. If you're out and about, suddenly you don't need to carry water. You don't need to carry tissue. You can sort of let the colours flow and move around the page. And because they're a nylon tip, actually, they are pretty easy to control. If anything, too easy to control and not easy enough to get those flowing colours. So they're not as good in many ways, but they are super convenient and something that you could experiment with to create more minimalist or gentle sketches. It is possible to paint with them, to do, instead of ink and watercolours, to do pure watercolour paintings just with those little cheap water brushes. So give it a go and see what happens, and see if you can adapt your normal processes to the outside. Now, one really key way that I would recommend approaching outdoors and finding that viewpoint and being able to narrow it down is to get comfortable with the idea that you're going to sketch a scene more than once. And perhaps the starting sketches you know aren't going to be great, and a way of making yourself feel okay with that and exploring a scene is through a thumbnail. If we go back to our opera house, that is a horribly complicated building, but what I first did is a really quick sketch, a really quick one-line sketch, then sketching and hatching in little bits of value, seeing what I find and what I miss on my first run through. Then on top of that, splashing some colours, just trying to see which colours might work together. There's lots of things wrong with this sketch, but that's fine. I can then move on, and I actually did a slightly bigger thumbnail, this time very flat, much more illustrative, trying to get a better grasp of the colours. So each little sketch can focus on one thing after another. And from there, I was able to feel comfortable and confident to build up and use my bigger piece of paper, not copying these two sketches, but learning from them, actually doing something quite different from both of them. But I learned a lot from my two smaller sketches, which made me feel comfortable and able to adapt to a bigger piece straight away. Don't forget, if you enjoy this style of teaching, if you enjoy my style of art, you can find me on sketchloose.co.uk. I have a completely free course there, 10 days of sketching, which takes you through 10 different concepts in these arts of loose ink and watercolour sketching to really boost your confidence. Got amazing reviews, people really seem to enjoy it, and it is totally free. So if you want to, check it out. It's linked down in the description below, and I would love to have you over there. Now, there are a couple of really specific things which are useful to know about in terms of measuring and in terms of sort of finding your angles outside. And all you need to do that is a flat object, and you will have one. You'll either have a paintbrush or a pen. So here's a flat object, which is a pen. And what I do to measure is I hold my arm straight. So you can see my arms out straight like so. And you can then hold that pen up to an object in your vision. So let's say my vision is what you're seeing, and you can see this house, which is sort of behind me just here. I can hold this up to the angles on the house. I can hold it to the angle of the roof. And then I have that fixed angle I can bring down to my page. And as long as I keep my arm straight and I don't rotate my wrist, that angle of the roof, which we can see up here and then over here, that angle of the roof will be the same on the page. So we can use that as a really simple way of finding everything from the vertical lines, the horizontal lines, perhaps even the horizon line, popping it at a known head level in the background and finding the horizon line going across the scene. It's all about using a flat object, a straight arm, and I always use, actually, I think both eyes, but maybe one eye is easier. Have a little experiment. So we've got our angles from doing this. That's great. So we can suddenly find every angle in our scene by moving our pen around in our vision. We can also measure, so we can get relative proportions of objects. So to do that, same idea. We get our angle, we get our line, so we get our house, whatever in the distance. Then if I come a bit closer, I'll be able to show you what I mean. So if I get my pen here up against that house, I can move my thumb until the top of the pen is at the top of the house, my thumb's at the bottom of the house. So now I have a known distance. That is the size of the house. No matter which way round that I have the pen, this is the size of that house. I can then move that around and I can compare that distance with other distances, and I can see, for example, the size of the house, the height of it is the same as this angle and the same as the top as well, but a little longer than the angle on the left. And by doing this we can compare different objects in our scene and get the comparative sizes all from one starting or anchor measurement, which is often the main object in the scene. Time now to have a little think about the general public, which are a big fear for many people. It's one of the most frequent comments I get on this channel. And I have two key tips. Now, number one, I understand, even I, who goes out with a load of filming equipment if I'm sketching outside, I feel a bit self-conscious doing that. But tip number one, if we want to avoid contact with the outside world, contact with the humans which inhabit our planet, a good pair of headphones. It's a visual sign to people that perhaps you can't hear them, and perhaps it's less worth trying to come over and talk to you. You don't have to listen to something, but I'll often listen to an audiobook. So I do actually like my headphones for other reasons. I have ones which are less visual than this though. You know, I have bone conducting ones which I use to run and walk with. And if I don't mind talking to people, I pop those on instead of these slightly claustrophobic ones. Now the other tip, we can actually recognise that people who are coming over aren't doing it to be mean. They aren't doing it to judge you. They're genuinely fascinated. I'll just show you a brief clip of a few people. Well, it's actually a clip of me sketching and painting, but just listen to what they say. It's far more about them talking to themselves than them judging myself and what I'm doing.
I don't know, it's line read. Someone else who's interested in what you're doing.
I wish I could do that.
That's what I said to him. I wish I admire people who can do that sort of thing.
Well, let's bring more.
Got yourself.
Well, we're a coach now, so they might get a few more yet. See, you're lovely. What's in there, Toby?
I do have I have business cards.
I was going to say we should start. Well, if you're interested in an online
If you want us to
course,
go around
then,
for you and.
So there you go. A couple of simple tips. One is, if you don't want people to come over, try simple visual cues. And the other thing is recognise if they are coming over, they're not doing it to be mean. They're not going to judge you, broadly speaking. I'm sure someone in a million will, but if they do, if they say something stupid, that's really on them and not on you. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out my ultimate guide to urban sketching, link down below, and I'll see you in one of these videos next. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.